Hello, Literacy LitFilmFest crew, and welcome to LitFilmFest Live, where we discuss a classroom topic and a brand new book to go alongside it. I'm Tim Miles, and tonight we're going to be looking at Dragon Fantasy, a modern day fantasy. And tonight we have a real mythical creature with us. It's Pat Matthews. Hi, Pat. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Yeah, well, thanks. Tell us a little bit about what you've written and the audience. Who's it for?
Sure. So the book I think we're talking about tonight is called Bradley's Dragons. It's a middle grade fantasy. Middle grade is, in this case, for ages 8 to 14. Different folks define middle grade differently, but in this case, kind of the higher end of higher spectrum middle grade. It's about a boy named Bradley growing up in a modern day Florida trailer park who kind of discovers the world around him has got a lot more magic and a lot more dragons than he thought.
And that's a nice place to be in, isn't it? To find there's more dragons than existed. Yeah, and I love that middle grade fiction. I think that's a really important step, just to tease out that books that capture maybe reluctant readers and push them onto the next stage or capture their attention for a few years are just really important, aren't they? And you wrote with that in mind, Pat, did you?
Totally. That's my that age bracket, and speaking to that group is really both what I like to do and what I want to do. I feel like it's an age where not only is the love of reading developing, but I also feel like there's a certain openness to new ideas and to just immersing yourself in a book and in a world and going along for the ride that's is harder to maintain as people get older and the audience kind of shrinks and you start dealing with more preconceptions and things like that. So that 8 to 12 to 14 year span for me, I guess that's where I live. That's my own mindset. I'm a perpetual 12-year-old.
It is a sweet spot, isn't it? And in celebration of that, we are giving away thank you, Pat, for giving us 5 copies to give away tonight as well. So all you have to do is follow, like, share, or comment below, and you stand a chance of winning one of Patrick's books. Each action counts as an entry, and this is going worldwide, I think, actually, aren't we? We're happy to ship where you live. And why not ask Patrick a question for your class as well, and we'll answer live on tonight's show. So, Patrick, I was wondering how you actually approach building a fantasy world. What kind of rules do you set in stone before you expand on something?
Oh, okay. So that's a great idea. A great question. So with Bradley's Dragons, it was pretty easy because the fantasy world is a modern day world. So really all I had to worry about defining was the magic system, how magic exists, and how does it work. And then in the case of Bradley's Dragons, there are 2 fantastical creatures or races that are in there. One is dragons, and one are the Fae. And the book kind of redefines what the Fae are from a traditional viewpoint. So for Bradley's Dragons, defining the fantasy world was a lot easier, really, because I just had those 3 things to worry about. I had to worry about magic, I had to worry about dragons, and I had to worry about the Fae. With other fantasy worlds that I built for Dragon Run and for The Boy with the Sword, that one was a lot harder because I had to create the whole world. So for me, creating the fantasy world, so I'll speak to those for a moment because that's I think more typical is trying to build that kind of a fantasy world than the Bradley's Dragons or the other approaches of getting magic in the modern world. But really, in both cases, for me, I think a huge starting point is the tone. For example, how valuable or how much does the fantasy world value life? In some fantasies, particularly the darker or the apocalyptic, characters and secondary characters die without any concern. In other fantasies, Bradley's Dragon is a great example, life is really valued. And if a life is even in danger, that is something that is significant across the mindset of the people there. And so I think some of that kind of work gets overlooked a lot when people are building a fantasy world. It's easy to understand. I have to write a map. I have to figure out a history. I got to figure out the people that are there. But the tone is super important. If you put a crazy killing machine in an otherwise tender story, it's just gonna break. It's not gonna work well. So I think for me, for a fantasy world, I start with tone, and then I identify what I need to build out, and I just kind of let that tone guide everything that I'm doing.
That's a great. I can see that. The teacher in me sees a sequence of lessons teaching that. Okay, kids, before we build our world, let's start with a tone. How are our characters going to deal with life? Are we going to? Is it going to be into Northern Lights territory where children are and their life force is like is important and sold and harvested, or are we going to go something a lot more lighter? And yeah, I think that's good. And then you'd move on to the rules concerning dragons and the map building, which is a joy to do, isn't it? Before you get into the nitty-gritty writing.
Yeah, and then I have a few tricks I try to do to try to keep things consistent. I pick a language that will help me kind of help me work whatever fantasy language I'm going to work with. So in the case of Dragon Run, I went with French. In the case of Bradley's Dragons, I went with Welsh. So I try to pick a modern language, or maybe not modern, but a known language to ground the fantasy language in as sort of a connecting point. So if you happen to know Welsh and you're reading Bradley's Dragons, then you'll be like, wait a minute, that's not magic, that's Welsh. I'm okay with that. I mean, I just think it's fun.
I think dragons do speak Welsh. We all know that.
Do, right?
In fact, I know some very, very Welsh dragons as it is anyway. Very Welsh people who are similar to dragons. And just on that as well, basing on real things. Carol, thanks, Carol, for writing in. Do you take any inspiration from any of your characters, from any of your friends or family members?
Totally. Yes. So most of my characters are. So I start with some concepts. Typically, I start with some concepts for if I have a hero that I want to investigate certain. All right. So instead of being vague, Bradley in Bradley's Dragons suffers from anxiety attacks, and one of the things that happens with people who have anxiety attacks is, in addition to having those anxiety attacks, you start to get scared about them happening. So you end up in this interesting spiral where you're scared about being scared, and you can see where that just kind of revolves around, right? So that's one of the core bits of Bradley in the book. So for my characters, I start with some of those core pieces, and then yes, I take from everybody I meet, everyone I know. I'm constantly just accumulating pieces of character traits, the ways of speaking. In this book, in particular, Aunt Lean, who's a character, I actually called my sister, whose name is Helene, and said, I'd love to have you in this book. And she gave me a few rules that I had to follow. And so, yeah, in this book in particular, Helene is fairly close to the real Helene, which is a big no-no, but I got permission, so it was fun.
Sell her identity. That's it.
Exactly.
And just on that as well, just because we're dipping into that, why did you decide to write this story with such mythical elements? Dragons being myths and legends speaks of King Arthur, doesn't it? But in the modern day, why did you decide to set that here rather than back in times of old?
So I wanted to go modern day because I wanted to connect with kids. Again, looking at that age bracket, at that 8 to 14, I wanted to connect with kids with a lifestyle and with things that they would immediately be familiar with. So there's a lot going on in Bradley's Dragons, and I didn't want to mix into that learning a new world, learning new races, learning all the stuff you would typically learn in an epic fantasy type of thing. I wanted this more focused on the character and on the journeys that they go through. So in this one, I grounded in the modern. And the reason for the mythical elements is because the mythical elements are what let the reader, they kind of set the reader free. If I'm talking about any modern issue that you might want to talk about, if it's talked about in modern terms, there's an immediate problem because first off, you pretty much have to take a stand one way or the other. If you're talking about whatever issue you want to claim, you kind of in concrete terms, you really have to make a decision. You have to present it in one way or the other. If you're writing in terms of fantasy, if you're writing in analogy and in metaphor, instead of doing that, you can have the mythical creatures, and you can have decisions not be made. You can present both sides of a thought. and it's not a problem. And it gives the kids and the readers the chance to go deep on their own, and to think about things. For example, in in so I'll step away from Bradley's Dragons for a moment. In Dragon Run, the story in Dragon Run, it's a fantasy world, and every person when they turn 13, it's a fantasy world that's run by dragons. Every person when they turn 13, they go and they get judged by a dragon. It's called testing day, and the dragons look deep into their soul and they evaluate them, and they give them a number between 1 and 7. 7, you're set for life. You can do magic. You're rich. Everybody loves you. 1, not so much. You're going to be ostracized. Everyone's going to hate you. And just so you remember this, these kindly dragon overlords tattoo it on the back of your neck. They call it a rank mark. So as adults, we hear this and we think this is horrible, right? You've got a number on the back of your neck, and it says exactly where you are in society. When I'm speaking in schools, to auditoriums full of kids, I ask the question, who would like to have one test for everything? You take one test, that's it. After that, you know where you are. You got a number on the back of your neck. If you're 7, great. If you're not, well, you don't have to worry about anything. And easily 50 to 75% of the class, of the auditoriums, the kids will be like, me, 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 me. And so I see around the edges, the teachers just,
kids.
You know,
oh, no.
yeah. But I mean, it's addressing that whole, I mean, that's addressing the whole issue of people being stereotyped and classism and all that stuff. But you can't talk about that in modern concrete terms and have the reader consider it in any sort of real way. So with Bradley's Dragons, what I was trying to do was have a nice story that is easy to connect to, set in the modern world, but have the mythical elements that lets me do crazy, exciting fantasy, lots of adventure, lots of fun, but also give people something to think about kind of beyond the fantasy.
Great. No, that's deep. I like that. That you can have such a simpler read for, that age group, but that touches on topics that will make them think. And people can sometimes think that fantasy is just about, elves or goblins or orcs, isn't it? But, it touches on real concepts, doesn't it? And kind of on that as well, just thinking about why you chose dragons, I was wondering what you think about the relationship between humans and dragons. How have you portrayed that, and why is that important?
So for me, dragons are okay. So let's. So for dragons, why dragons is a great question. And the relationship between humans and dragons with this book is particularly interesting, and I can't really talk about that relationship without giving huge spoilers. So let me talk about why dragons. So what are dragons, right? Dragons have been portrayed differently throughout history, but there are lots of commonalities. They're big, they're powerful, they're scary, they're overwhelming. There aren't, in Smaug and The Hobbit isn't someone that the dwarves just walk up to and scare away. He's this giant thing. And throughout fantasy, that's kind of the role that dragons have taken. On the flip side, there are also dragons that are still big and powerful, but they're friendly, like How to Train Your Dragon and Pete's Dragon and a lot of others. And in those cases, that big and powerfulness is now something that is incredibly comforting. And it's a magical relationship. It's a creature that knows more than we as humans know, but we're connecting. So we've got these two kind of stereotypical dragons, the big, powerful, magic-using dragon that's way more powerful than we are, and then the powerful dragon that's wiser or has magic or has more information than we do. So with those two things in mind, cast your own memory back to when you were 5 or 6. What were adults? Were there big, scary adults that you didn't want to mess with, that knew everything you didn't know? Yeah. I mean, and were there the flip side, the big, powerful adults that protected you and kept you safe and loved you? So for me, dragons are huge because I feel like, again, even though it's not spelled out, I feel like it's something that everybody connects to from the very beginning. That feeling of, oh my gosh, here's a big, powerful thing, something that's familiar to us. Or, oh my gosh, here's this big, powerful thing that I love. It's also really familiar to us. So in my head, that's the role dragons fill. So I I tend to write about them.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. Laura Braun says, kids love dragons and they love modern life. Of course they do. Sounds like a perfect combo. Yeah, nice to mix those two together, isn't it? Carol also asks, thanks for commenting as well, guys. You're in with a chance of winning a copy of Patrick's book. Carol asks, why did you choose a Florida trailer park as the setting for Bradley's home?
I live in Florida, so it has a little advantage there because the writers in Florida, it's interesting. There's kind of a tradition of writers in Florida who make the landscape kind of a character. They really do a great job of bringing it to life. And as a writer, I wanted to take a swing at that. I wanted to see what I could do, to kind of evoke that sense of the landscape. The trailer park part, I just wanted to play against the expectation. Everybody expects dragons and magic and these big formal fantasies with names you can't pronounce and all sorts of stuff. And so I wanted this to be as grounded as it could. I wanted it to be just a kid living in a trailer park, facing all those modern day problems. With the dragon and magics coming as into that world.
Great. Yeah, like rooted in the real life, isn't it? And then magic seeps in. Yeah, I like that. Did you enjoy writing at school? Have you always been a writer? And were you encouraged by any particular teachers, maybe?
Oh, my. Sure. I don't know if any... I might be a little older than I look, I hope. I don't know how many of my teachers are still out there to hear me say it, but yes, I had a ton of teachers who encouraged me. The first one has got to be my mom, who's an English teacher. And so once I got into reading and really understood that reading a book is essentially a conversation between the author and the reader, because the story is happening in the reader's head. So I was loving stories. Andre Norton, Anne McCaffrey, Isaac Asimov, Kipling, all these stories, Tolkien, that I was just consuming. And then one day when I was 12, it just hit me that I was basically having these conversations with people from other countries, some of whom had already died. And it was like, these were like the experiences that I loved. So I hit on the idea of I wanted to be a part of that. So I kind of started writing. And then along the way, I had lots of writers who encouraged me. I could go through Mr. Atkins, Mr. Solis, Mr. Russell. I could just go down the list, who I think, in retrospect, looking at it, I think they saw a student who was excited about writing and wanted to just keep the ball rolling. But they gave me a ton of information, guidance, help, and in both directions, both, way to go and you might want to go a different way. So
I think it's just, I always like asking that question to authors because, you are a published author, and to see the teachers behind that and the build up of thoughtful lesson plans and sharing of information to help you get there is something that, our community, we should be really proud about teaching the writers of tomorrow, the authors of tomorrow who will be writing, based on experiences and further reading. So,
that's interesting. With that question, a moment that comes to mind is I had a teacher, Mr. Solis, who, he did a unit, I guess you'd call it. We did a couple weeks where we read and analyzed modern songs as poetry, which it stuck with me. It really did. It was really interesting.
Right, and Patrick, we're about to go on to the quick fire fiction round, where I'm going to ask you some tricky questions about a reading you're about to do for us. Are you ready?
Yep, fire away.
Okay, well, we've got to do the intro sequence first. There it was. Patrick, you're going to read the first 3 pages of the first chapter, if that's okay. Over to you, and then I'll get testing you.
All right, sounds good. So this is chapter 1 of Bradley's Dragons. It's called A Lost Memory. Stop. Bradley paused, his throwing arm in mid-motion. He and his aunt were skipping stones on a lake in the Ocala National Forest. She had the record, 7 bounces. Why? His aunt wasn't looking at him. She faced away from the lake, and her eyes were scanning the thick Florida woods. We need to go. Aunt Lean. That was what Bradley called her. Her real name was Helene, but when he was 2 years old, he'd pronounced Aunt Helene as Aunt Lean. He'd called her that ever since. I know, she said. We'll come back. But you're winning. I'm serious, Bradley. Bradley stuffed his skipping stone into his pocket. It was bigger than he usually threw, but flat and round. The score doesn't count, he said. The game's not over till I get my next throw. I know, just... The palmettos rustled behind them, and she turned. A man stood at the trail entrance. He was tall and pale, with short hair, red hair, and a brown leather jacket that was too heavy for the Florida heat. Max? Aunt Lean said, her voice uncertain. He walked toward them through the long grasses at the edge of the wood. Helene, he said. What are you doing? She asked. You know you can't be here. I came for Bradley. Not funny. Aunt Lean stepped forward, so she was between Bradley and the man. Max stopped. He leaned sideways and smiled around her at Bradley. Bradley shivered. The man's eyes looked wrong, glassy and unfocused. Stop it, Aunt Lean said. Ignoring her, the man held his hand out toward Bradley and made a twirling gesture with his finger. Hello, Bradley, he said. I'm Max. At the sound of the name, Bradley's vision dimmed. Pain blossomed behind his eyes, and the world seemed to tilt and blur. No, Aunt Lean shouted. Aunt Lean, Bradley gasped. What's happening? Max was out of the weeds now, and walking toward them, repeating that strange, twirling gesture. Sweat dripped down Bradley's back. His chest ached, and his legs felt weak and rubbery. His vision dimmed again, and he collapsed to the ground. Get back, Aunt Lean growled at Max. Max stumbled, then regained his balance, leaning forward as if against a strong wind. He stepped closer. You can't stop me, not with him here. Bradley concentrated on his aunt. It's okay, he told himself. Aunt Lean's here. She knows what to do. His vision started to clear. The muddy grass felt warm and wet between his fingers, and the smells of lake water and dying fish filled his nose. Aunt Lean's deeply tanned skin looked paler than usual. Her eyes were glittering angry slits. Why? She demanded. The two of you alone? Max asked. How could I not? He took another step closer. But he's only 9, she shouted, her voice cracking. He'll grow. Panting with effort, Bradley forced himself to stand. His head still hurt, but his dizziness was gone. Run, Aunt Lean hissed under her breath. Bradley's eyes widened. His aunt was scared. Her green eyes locked with his. Run now. Heart pounding with fear, Bradley shook his head. No. Bradley! I won't leave you, he insisted, voice trembling. I won't.
Oh, so tense. Oh, Thanks for sharing that, Patrick. Yeah, really good. Really thrown straight into Bradley's world, and clearly has a good relationship with his aunt, which is great. And then that's shattered, isn't it, in one swift entrance of this mysterious Max. So, yeah, chapter 2 gives a lot more information, I imagine, on what's about to happen.
Yeah, okay. So this starts with him when he's 9. Chapter 2 it jumps forward 3 years when he's 12. And that first chapter is called A Lost Memory because he doesn't remember any of it.
Interesting. Okay, quick fire questions. So, and hopefully I get a quick fire, succinct answer back. I'll be grading on that as well.
Sounds good.
On page 1, why can't Bradley's aunt look at him?
Oh, she's distracted by the rustling of the trees. She's worried about Max showing up.
Correct. Number 2, how different are Bradley and Aunt Lean's thoughts at the start? What are they both thinking about?
At the start, Bradley's just thinking about winning the stone skipping game. And then when Max shows up, he's confused and weak and not sure what's going on. At the start for Helene, she's pretty much in the same place he is. They're just skipping stones across the lake. But once Max shows up, she's got a lot more to think about. I can't talk too much more about her stuff because her plot line develops through the book, and it's not really revealed till the last couple of chapters.
She's clearly worried. I love that. 2 characters being in the same scene but thinking different things at the same time, because Bradley clearly just wants to carry on with the game, doesn't he? He's quite childish at this stage, but Aunt Helene or Aunt Lean's, she's tense, isn't she? She's always seems to be suspecting that he's going to be hunted in some way, and that's really apparent, I think, in that first page.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, good. 2 points. Why does Bradley shiver?
Max is in the process of basically stealing Bradley's energy. So he's in a bad way once Max shows up and starts doing his stuff.
And he looks directly in his eyes as well, isn't it? That's I think the phrase was page 2. I think. Yeah, it's when he looks at him. Yeah. Okay. I really like this phrase. Pain blossoming.
Oh.
Pain blossoming. How can pain blossom?
So that's how it feels like to me. If I get a headache or something, it will start in one place and then it'll spread from there. So I kind of envision that as a flower blossoming, opening up.
Because that's almost quite positive in a way, in a flower blossoming. But the thought of pain behind your eyes, that doesn't sound so. Yeah, it's quite a visceral, I think, image that. Yeah. This phrase here was a really interesting one. His vision started to clear. The muddy grass felt warm and wet between his fingers, and the smells of lake water and dying fish filled his nose. How does this show what is now happening to Bradley?
So he is in a panic state at this point. He doesn't know what's going on. He's been dizzy. His energy is just leaving him, and he doesn't have any idea why. This is the point where he's reconnecting with the world around him. He's kind of grounding himself. He's focusing on his aunt. Yeah. So he's coming back to within himself, coming back to who he is.
And all of his senses seem to be waking up one by one, but as if from sleep itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like semi-state and faints and stance. He's waking up, and I love that his vision starts to come back first, and then he feels his fingers, and the smell has a nice sequence to it. That.
Thank you.
Yeah, really like that. Which adjectives did you use to describe?
Oh my gosh. See, now I want to open the book. I know they're glassy and I know they're unfocused. So I'm going to guess those are the two that I used.
Very good. Oh, top marks coming up here. Excellent. And finally, what does Bradley's dad do to reassure him when he awakes? I'll take 2 points from this one. Okay.
So when Bradley awakens, his dad's role right there is simply to be his dad, is to be recognized as being a solid, he's described as a solid block of a man, reassuring, just stable. So he doesn't really do that much. He says he says he's proud of him. I guess that's a good reassurance. Yeah, I guess that's it. Yeah, I got there eventually. Sorry, too slow.
And he also puts his hand on his shoulder as well. True. Which I thought was a real reassuring, like stabilizing moment. So he puts his hand on his shoulder and says, "Yeah, I'm really proud of you, son." And that's a lovely moment. Well done. I will give you full marks for that.
Thank you.
You did a great job. You do know your own writing, which is proof to witness everyone here. Thank you so much. Do you have any more books coming out as well in the future, Patrick?
So the sequel to Bradley's Dragons I'm working on right now. It's called The Book of Abigail. I can't guarantee that'll still be the name when it's published, but that's what I'm working on now. I'm hoping that's going to be out in 3 or 4 months, but we'll see. And then after that, yes, I'm hoping to do 2 or 3 books a year if all goes well. All on the and I'm doing them all under the Second Story Up imprint. So yeah.
Fantastic. And you've got The Boy with the Sword that was out. There's some beautiful covers as well, aren't they? And Dragon Run.
Yeah, thank you.
So do check out Patrick's website, which is pat-matthews.com. And you can also buy the books on Amazon, I believe, as well.
Yep.
Yeah, so do look out for those. So it's been lovely to have you on, Patrick. A real... Yeah, I love that kind of middle grade fiction. Very goosebumpy for me because that was my fiction that I found like horror fiction almost that helped me to get into reading, and then on to Terry Pratchett and The Hobbit. So it's lovely to see something that's being written, contemporary fiction about that on some really important issues.
Oh, thank you.
So yeah, thank you very much for joining us.
All right, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Good. Take care. And if you were really enjoying thinking about Patrick's books there, please check out LitFilmFest.com, where we do have lots of free resources, all geared around reviewing books. Lots of projects on there, so you can access them all with a free account, which is amazing. I'll just show you a few just at the bottom there. So you could review Fantastic Mr. Fox and Key Stage 1 and Flat Stanley, but also we've got projects on Holes, with questions and free resources, whiteboard slides, lesson plans, all about that. So please check those out. Kenzuki's Kingdom, one of my favorite books, is also reviewed, and we are doing lots of work with some of our best educators, our elite educators, with that, showcasing what your class do in the classroom as well themselves. We also have our Quickfire Write series, which is well worth a look. I must say, it even has its own tab on the website. Look, it's so easy to find, and you can find an age-appropriate group of free projects for you to teach in the classroom. All you need to do is simply click through, and it'll take you straight there, and then there'll be a video to start kick you learning about a topic, lots of questions and simple activities just underneath. And you can see just the wealth of projects that are free to use on all sorts of things. Climate crisis, esports, there you go. Fair trade, if I click through to that one, you'll be able to see that there's absolutely tons of projects. Simple questions to get you thinking just at the start, followed by lots of different activities for you to do, and a video to play as well and get you going. Right, that's it from me, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been lovely and a great topic to really explore, one that's close to my heart, fantasy fiction. Don't forget to enter our competition by liking, commenting, sharing, or following our page, and you stand a chance of winning one of Patrick Matthews' books, and we'll send straight to you and enjoy it to your class as well. Every action counts as an action for entry as well, and we are accepting worldwide entries for this one, which is great. Thank you, everyone, and take care.